First of all, I would like to welcome our guests and remind them that their cameras have been turned off and their mics have been muted. Most folks who have been participating in these efforts to share critical business information during the pandemic know that you communicate or ask questions through the chat function. We'll be monitoring that chat function and we'll try to get to your questions. So here we go. First and foremost, I want to thank our guest, Brian Miller, Vice President of Growth and Policy for Project Canary, for joining us today. Folks know that part of our mission is to always be working on behalf of the oil and gas industry in Oklahoma. Part of that is the advocacy function, and part of that is telling our members where we think the puck is going. We've shared some ESG information in the past. We've talked about the relevancy of technology, and today we're going to talk about a portion of the ESG effort that is gaining rapid traction within the industry, and that is from folks such as Project Canary, where we are continuously monitoring emissions from industry operations and certifying the final product, be it natural gas or oil, primarily natural gas, and some of these things to talk about is responsibly sourced. So Brian, thank you very much for joining us today. And Brian and I have known each other for a long time. We worked together in Washington, D.C. on some efforts to make certain that folks were comfortable about hydraulic fracturing. So there is a corollary here that we can mention at some point. But Brian, why don't you just talk to us a little bit at the top here about Project Canary, what it is, how it works, and why it's important.
Yeah, great. Brooke, thanks for the opportunity, both to you and Cody and your membership, to join you this morning. Really excited for the opportunity. And it's been great to reconnect with you, Brooke. I'll just say, you didn't ask me to, but you all have a great hand in Brooke. He's an incredibly well-respected individual in the advocacy space. He's got a lot of great experience and just is a good man generally. So I'm pleased to be here, and it's been great to reconnect with you, Brooke.
Thanks, Brian.
You bet. So just a little bit of background. My name's Brian Miller. I am the Vice President of Growth and Policy for Project Canary. I've worked in the industry on the E&P side, for about 16, 17 years for BP. Most of my time was, as Brooke had indicated, in Washington, D.C. In the policy arena. And then I worked for about 7 years for Noble Energy. And Noble certainly had its roots in Oklahoma, and anybody that worked for Noble always had a special place in their hearts for the great state of Oklahoma. So appreciate that. Just as I was mentioning to Brooke and Cody yesterday, one of the reasons I got into this business is because I believe in the fundamental long-term viability of the North American gas resource, the associated resources, and the infrastructure, right? It's about ensuring the long-term viability of those resources. And that's what I'm all about. And I believe that we fundamentally can do it through data and transparency, in much the way that Brooke alluded to the work that we did in Washington around hydraulic fracturing, around water use, and the Frac Focus initiative, which seemed to allay a number of the concerns from the public and others around social license to operate, et cetera. So that, I think, was a great analog to what we're doing here. We'll talk a little bit about sort of some of the emerging trends in this space in which we operate. But I think importantly, from a sort of service provider or technology provider's perspective, I think it's always important that we put an operator's hat on and sort of come at things from that perspective. So as we think about the challenges that you all in the operating community have, increasing challenges around ESG, right? The social license to operate sort of writ large. And what are those pressures that are coming at you as operators? Access to capital, obviously a very big consideration. And then just the myriad of regulatory risks. You guys have a pretty stable environment there in Oklahoma with respect to state regulations, but clearly there's been a fundamental change at the top of the house, if you will, from a federal perspective. So there's a lot of movement that's going to come there. And so we feel like in that context, with those challenges, that we sort of have a perfect market fit, if you will, for helping companies address those challenges. I'll mention those two items here just briefly, and then I'll dig into them a little bit deeper. But what we do is we come in and we certify operation. So think about a LEED certification for a building. You have a gold, silver, platinum, whatever it may be. We do that on a well-by-well basis, so provide a certification score. And then we do continuous monitoring. So we have technology devices that actually put on location. I'll show you a little bit about that in just a minute, that monitor for emissions 24/7. So think about us as sort of an ESG, an evolving ESG data or technology company that will provide that independent third-party validation that operators can utilize as a way to demonstrate their performance around ESG. And so those two things actually, when you talk about the risks at the high level, you talk about continuous monitoring and certification, what are some benefits that actually accrue from the implementation of those options? Well, one, you now have a better defined ESG program. So when investors and others look at your ratings, they can say, okay, this is, a well-run company. They understand their environmental, their social impacts. Once you've got that, you can improve your access to capital. So we've seen real discussions, and I think we'll see some actual market transactions where people are actually getting a lower cost of capital because their operations are well understood. And then this access to this burgeoning market around responsibly sourced gas or certified gas, as Brooke indicated. And we see some real opportunities emerging there. The interesting thing in all of this is actually it's being driven mostly by investors and by buyers. The consumers, whether it's an LNG buyer, whether it's a utility, they're really driving a lot of the action in this space. And right now we sort of say internally, we're playing with a smaller subset of the industry that either wants to lead or is being encouraged by their investors to get into this space. And we think it's going to continue to emerge across the industry. So that's just a little bit of context around where we come from in this operation and how we approach some of these issues. I'll just touch a little bit on sort of where we're playing in the market space. So we're working with a number of E&P companies. We have contracts with on the order of about 40 companies today. This nice little fly is buzzing around my head, so don't bother him. He tends to do that from time to time. So we're working with a number of E&Ps, midstream companies as well, then LNG providers and utilities. So I'll kind of just section that off real quickly. So the E&Ps, I think, just talked about them. They're really being driven by the buy side and by the customers. The midstream companies are actually leaning in and saying, okay, I've got a producer on this end who wants to be able to deliver its product to, say, a utility. Well, I want to get in the game as a company that's monitoring my operations and can say to both ends of that transaction that I've got a low emission, certified operation here. So think sort of tip to tip, right? From the producer all the way through the pipes to the end user. Then LNG buyers are very interested in this space because they want to have that certified and monitored production that they can then sell to their customers. And the utilities, we've seen a number of RFPs put out, somewhere on the order between 12 and 15 of them all across the country, looking for ways in areas in which they can source RSG, responsibly sourced gas. They've been doing smaller volume deals, 5,000 a day, 10,000 a day, but we're seeing more movement in that space, up to 25 and 50,000 a day. There's an active buyer out there in the marketplace that's looking to actually build a BCF a day portfolio of responsibly sourced gas. So we see some real movement and momentum there. I think from a Project Canary perspective, if you look at year end, we will probably have done somewhere on the order of 9,000 certifications, and we do that on a well by well basis. And then we'll probably have on the order of 800 to 1,000 of our devices installed in the field. And I think importantly, back to the earlier comment, we're about ensuring the long-term viability of North American gas. We're one company. There are other companies out there. Baker Hughes, for example, their Avitas product is something that we're aware of, and we're supportive of their efforts. So we're for all technologies, if you will. And there's some other certification programs out there too. Equitable Origin, which is a Canadian firm that looks more at the S element of the ESG. And then there's an outfit called MIQ, which is a combination of the Rocky Mountain Institute based in Colorado and a company called Systemic, which is based out of the UK. Both of those are more focused on, like I said, some of the social, but also methane in particular. We have a very detailed engineering approach that we take to our certification program. But again, competition's good, markets are good, and we're for just raising standards across the board to, again, enable that long-term viability. I think that's really the crux of my introductory remarks, just to frankly, level set, give you some insights and share some context around the marketplace. Happy, Brooke, to answer any questions now before I just want to do a little bit of a slideshow here.
Sure. So let me just restate. So eventually, your customers, your vendors, your end users, they're all going to be interested in this type of transparency and real data when it comes to emissions. And we've seen some actions primarily by the European market on US LNG. I think France made some pronouncements on that that were rather troubling and disruptive to some deal flow. So this is what's around the corner, what's coming, and how we all adapt to this environment, whether we're a large company or a small company, is going to be critical to the long-term viability of our products, our industry, the company itself, right? Great.
Indeed. Yep.
Okay. Why don't we go ahead, and I'm monitoring the chat line right here, but Brian, go ahead and tee up your slides so we can understand how this works.
Yep, you bet. Let me.
And as you're pulling that up, the easiest question, talk about Canary and the name Project Canary.
Talk about Canary and the name Project Canary. I think it's, we're all familiar with the canary in the coal mine. I think for us, it's really just about, that early alert, kind of continuous monitoring, always on, as we say internally, always chirping, watching for what might be happening on a location.
Great.
Yep. And it looks like there was another one there. I don't know if you want to go to that.
Yep. The question from Chris and Hinky is, do you certify well service providers? How's that? Might want to get into that.
We do not currently do anything with well service providers. We have the Trust Well certification program that we do on a well by well basis on the E&P side. We are working to build a midstream certification program where we would certify locations, compressor stations, booster stations, gas plants. We did do a deal with Berkshire Hathaway Energy on one of their compressor sets. And that's, if you go to our website, you'll see there's a press release there. Yep.
All right, take us away with the.
Okay, great. So some of this will be repetitive, and I apologize that I can't get full screen. Oh, maybe I can. Here we go. Move some things around. There we go. How's that?
Perfect.
Good. Okay. Just a little bit more about us. This whole conversation around operators trying to move to net zero is ultimately going to be possible in the world in which we're evolving to. As I said earlier, we are a provider of ESG data via our TrustWell certification and our digital dashboard that I'll show here in a minute. I think one of the interesting things to note here is what a lot of operators are doing as they're trying to get into the ESG space is they're actually going out and saying, okay, if I have 200 wells, I'm going to go do a TrustWell certification of all of those wells. And if operators do that in a particular basin, go do the vast majority of their wells or all of them, ideally, that gives you that sort of baseline. It gives you that ESG baseline. How many silver, how many gold, how many platinum wells do I have? And then allows you to demonstrate that annual performance improvement that people are always looking for, regardless of whether it's ESG. I mean, performance metrics are critical in this business and others as we move forward. So having that level setting has been a really interesting evolution for a lot of companies, and we're obviously here to enable that as and where appropriate. And another thing to mention here, we're a B Corp, so we're a public benefit corp, so we have an interest in social good, as I sort of alluded to earlier, and obviously a bottom line. So we're a for-profit entity, but we have special consideration and concern to the impacts of our operations and so forth. We have a very, very strong rating on the B Corp side of the equation. Just moving forward, I talked a little bit about the challenges that are out there, whether it's regulatory risks, these evolving carbon markets, investor pressures, the ESG competitive landscape, I think are really essential to the social license to operate in this new energy paradigm in which we're living. Just getting into the technology a little bit. So first I'll talk about continuous monitoring, and then I'll talk about our Trust Well certification. So these are the devices that we put on locations. We typically, on a typical well pad, multi-well pad location, we would put 3 devices. I know a lot of operators, and particularly in Oklahoma, have probably a single pad with just 1 well on it. We would not apply that type of technology or cost to that type of location. I mentioned Baker Hughes earlier, might be able to get away with a device that's there. And then you need to think about, what are you trying to solve for, right? Are you trying to solve for monitoring, or are you trying to solve for a desire to actually get into the certified or responsibly sourced gas space? If you're trying to solve for monitoring, there's technologies out there that are a little more cost efficient than what we would do with a 3-pad monitoring scenario. So it just depends on what you're trying to solve for again. So here are our units. Lost my cursor. This is our so-called black box. This is the Canary unit. It tests for a variety of chemical constituents. It has a battery backup for times when the sun doesn't shine. We have an anemometer, which is critical to, that works in combination with the laser-based sensors that sit within this device to tell us wind speed and direction. Depending on the type of operation, you may or may not need a SUMA canister. This is really to do air grab samples for hazardous air pollutants. So if you're in an area where that's a consideration, you would deploy a SUMA canister potentially. This was really built as a regulatory compliance tool in the state of Colorado, where the industry is now required on all new well starts beginning May 1st to monitor for VOCs continuously for the first 6 months of production, and then a solar panel to keep the birds chirping. So our approach is a little bit unique to some of the technologies that are out there today. And really, for us, it's really about real-time independent data, right? We're there all the time. We're on 24/7. We detect every second and upload the data to the cloud through AWS cloud to our server on a minute basis. So we gather the data, upload it, gather the data, upload it. And so we have a very high detection limit versus some of the other technologies that are out there, but really the delta for us versus a drone or an optical gas imaging sensor, airplanes, satellites are that we're on all the time, and we can not only identify those large sources, but the intermittent leaks, which is really a critical operational consideration. So that's why we find ourselves in the top right hand of the box there. So this is our digital dashboard, and if you, I'll beg your pardon for just a second, I'm going to switch over to the real-time dashboard here to give you a sense of what that looks like on a real-time basis.
So as you're doing that, you're placing monitors all around this well site, and you're getting data in real time. You're uploading that on a minute-by-minute basis so that we have a complete picture of what the emissions profile of the well pad is.
That's exactly right, Brooke. Okay. Exactly. Yep. Okay, so this is a location in Colorado. Can everybody see my screen? Brooke, can you give me? Yep. Yeah. Okay, great. So you'll note so wellheads, the tanks, the VRUs, vapor recovery units, and then these are the separators. And so we typically, as I said earlier, would deploy 3 units on a location to triangulate, sort of the best way to get the data. On this particular location, we have multiple units. This is a research project we're doing with one of our operating partners in Colorado and the Colorado School of Mines. We're trying to get to source probability on locations, and then also, we're trying to get to source location and quantification. So actually quantifying the emissions, and this will all ultimately lead us to sort of a net zero emissions opportunity down the road, but we're still in the early stages here. So that's our location here. Whoops, my fingers get messed up here. Okay, so what we have here, these are the multiple sensors on the location. Here's your wind speed and direction. These are alarms. So on an operation, you would set an alarm to alert you when you get an exceedance. So I'm just going to pick out here. So this is real time as of a little bit earlier today. I haven't refreshed. So it was 8:20 a.m. This is a Colorado location. So let's just pick this red sensor here. So that is the easternmost location on the site. At that point in time, the wind speed was roughly 5 miles an hour coming from the west to, oh, no, it wasn't. It was 2.7 miles an hour. Sorry, we won't go with that because that's just multiple strands in one. The predominant wind speed and direction was coming from the west toward the east. So if we go down to this location, that was the device that tripped. The wind speed and direction was coming from the west to the east. So this would be suggestive that there was something going on with the vapor recovery units, maybe an igniter issue or something, possibly a planned event, don't know, but that gives folks on location an ability to understand, okay, this was an intermittent circumstance. And then if we go over to this other screen here, we're moving to a place where we can actually get to source probability on a particular location. And this is all beta testing.
So if I have an intermittent release,
Yep.
I'm watching this and I can determine generally what might be the equipment that I need to address if I want to get on top of this right away. Correct?
That's exactly right. You got it. And I will, I'll show you a couple of examples of how we've remediated things pretty quickly on different locations. Let me pop back over.
So real time through either automation or through a guy on the ground.
Yep.
Addressing an issue. We're addressing intermittent releases immediately.
Yep, as they arise. That's exactly right. So just to look, thank you for that prompt. So we had some frozen tanks and some liquid knockout issues. Obviously, when you've got freezing on a location, you got to wait for that to thaw. We had some inefficient flaring issues. So the hardware was addressed. Burners weren't coming on in an efficient fashion like they should have. We had some thief hatch issues. Those are always, not always, but often considerations or concerns. Vapor recovery pressure unit pressure issues may have been the consideration in the screen we just talked about just a moment ago. So that's where I'll stop on the continuous monitoring side of the equation, and then I'll switch over to a discussion about our TrustWell certification.
Great. And as you're doing this, I'm going to a question that Maki has asked from Baker Hughes. What is the accuracy of the measurements? Also, how many separate sources can you distinguish?
So we sense for 12 different constituents, VOCs, particulate matter, methane, et cetera. We have an entire scheme that we can apply just depending on the type of environment in which you're working. Are you sensing for VOCs, for methane, for both? We can do both of those. And we can do ppm at various levels as well.
Okay. All right, go for it, Brian.
Okay, great. So rounding back to the TrustWell certification. So again, it's a lead type certification for a location. The interesting thing about what we do versus some of the others in the marketplace is we take an engineering approach to operatorship. So we fundamentally believe we're talking about oil and gas development that all starts with the wellhead and the geology and the structural integrity of the operations. So we go deep into the engineering of every location. And again, we do this on a well by well location. So we have about 600 data points that we look at in every well across 24 categories, some of which are dynamic, some of which are static. Think about us as a sort of Carfax from a static perspective. You know, what's the maintenance record, any accidents, things of that nature. And then we also have the dynamic element. The way I think about it is the Equifax report, right? Your credit report, your credit score, it's always changing depending on, are you paying your bills on time, et cetera, et cetera. So there's some considerations within those 24 categories where we're doing dynamic evaluations across time. What we look at in terms of the evaluation is air, water, land, and community impacts. So do you have robust GHG emission protocols in place? How are you managing your water? What sort of efforts are you taking to minimize impacts to land? Do you do emergency response drills with local fire departments? Do local communities understand the considerations? We take that all into account. There are algorithms that we've built that create these scores. The whole TrustWell program was built with obviously subject matter experts from industry, with folks from the regulatory community. We had folks from Pennsylvania and the state of Colorado involved. EDF was involved from an NGO perspective, early days in the work that we did. And so this is a very, very robust and comprehensive certification program. The way that it works is we look at those risk profiles related to air, water, land, and community. We look at the control measures that operators have in place. So are they doing whatever the regulation requires? Are they going above and beyond? Do they have best practices? Are they going even above and beyond those best practices to create a performance score that creates the rubric for how an operator scores relative to silver, gold, platinum scoring? And we have a set of minimum standards for each one of those, as well as core documentation that we require to get to that. And so this is what a typical scoring program would look like. You know, how do you manage chemical releases? What's the inherent profile? So what's the risk? How well is it controlled? And then what's your according score? And then whether it impacts air, water, land, or community. So this is, again, what a typical certification score would look like. One of the things I really, really like, and a lot of operators like from a TrustWell certification standpoint, is given the number of certifications we've done, we're able to identify areas where you may want to give things a little more attention. So this is just a 9 box that says, hey, these things are adequately addressed. These issues sort of above the line are considerations that you may want to look at. And again, you know, it's nice to have somebody look over your shoulder and provide that continuous improvement opportunity. And then really that's the last of the slides. We talked about this earlier. This is a bit of a salesy piece, not here to do that, just more to share information, but really, you know, TrustWell certification and continuous monitoring really addresses those ESG, the differentiated or certified product market opportunities, enhances your ability to access capital at a lower cost. And obviously, if you're doing all of that, you've got an enhanced enterprise value. So that's it for the slides. Hopefully gave you enough context there for any questions or discussions folks would like to have.
Let me touch on a few things here. What I've done is I've pulled up from the website the TrustWell categories, Brian.
Right. Yes.
Here, and this is sort of the lead rating that we were talking about here, where you have the silver, the gold, and the platinum. And with regard to the performance rating, capturing within all of those categories that you're talking about here, you've got the water, air, land, and community, spill prevention, waste management, emergency response, and well integrity aspects of this. So if you're a gold standard, you're meeting like 100%, an A score on this
Yep.
card. And then for the platinum, you're going above and beyond, right?
That's
So,
right. And typically, for that platinum, you're doing continuous monitoring on that location.
okay. So that is a continuous monitoring application. It's not a periodic or episodic. It's continual. All right.
That's correct. That's
And
correct. Yep.
with regard to this issue and how the industry is emerging and how the markets are emerging, there has been discussion about being able to command a premium on your platinum certified effort. In other words, company X competing with company Y in basin A might be able to, and you have to tell me how realistic this is today versus what it might be in the future, to get a higher price for a company's gas. Is that what you're seeing develop, and how we're beginning to think about this as competitors against one another?
Yes, and generally what the market's looking for from the certified gas perspective, Brooke, is gold or better. So gold certification and or platinum certification. And that gives the operators, you take, European buyers, for example, they want to understand the fidelity of the operation, right? They want to understand, okay, it's met a certain set of standards, and they want to understand the air profile, right? Has this operator, taken best efforts to reduce their emissions and actually take steps to monitor them on that particular location.
Okay.
So gold or better, platinum is consistent with a continuous monitoring requirement.
Okay, so let me bird walk back this. We know that the world cannot meet its energy demands without hydrocarbons, especially for purposes of this conversation, we're talking about natural gas. So when you look at foreign markets and I'm going to say, the attacks by some of our rivals with regard to US produced product, how we provide our friends, allies, and customers overseas with the opportunity to demonstrate that they're meeting their constituent demands with good molecules, right? That's what we're talking about here.
Yep, and the way to do that is through data and transparency. That's really the only way to do it. I can cross my heart, but that's not going to meet somebody else's requirements on the buy side, right?
Okay, all right, very good. I'm going to switch back to the chats. There has been a request for additional clarification regarding the accuracy of the devices. And Brian, I don't know whether you're the right person to answer that or not. We might need to put Maki in contact with someone else who can talk about that.
So I can talk about that briefly. So as I indicated, there are 12 different constituents that we monitor for. The sensitivity is to parts per billion on these devices. Our Canary X device can do ppb. We've gotten to 0.01 grams from 75 meters. That was a test that was done earlier this year at METEC, which is at Colorado State up in Fort Collins. I hope that helps answer the question a little bit more, but absolutely, Maki, if you have a need for more information, if you'd like to understand the specifications of our units, happy to provide that separately. Feel free to reach out. brian.miller@projectcanary.com. By all means, can connect you with Dr. Anna Scott, who is our president, and unfortunately she was going to be here today but was unable to given some other client pressures, but she's the person that's developed these devices and can certainly address more detail there as well.
Thank you, and we'll be happy to make that connection. Is continuous monitoring necessary to demonstrate gas is responsibly sourced? This sort of gets into the previous question. Talk about this, continuous monitoring versus the episodic.
Yeah, so again, what we're seeing in the marketplace is a desire of the buyer to, in order to pay that premium that you mentioned, Brooke, they want to see continuous monitoring. as part of that certification process. We've seen premiums. Obviously, we're not privy to all of them, but we've heard about premiums anywhere from low to middle single digits. There have been some outliers, so the outliers on both ends typically get shaved. As this market continues to evolve, we've seen, a lot of activity in the Marcellus. You got EQT and Southwestern. I think combined, they'll have 7 BCF a day certified as responsibly sourced. Mid-Atlantic markets are very interested in this product. LNG markets are very interested in this product as well. So I think that will continue to evolve. As I mentioned earlier, we're under contract with about 40 operators. We have probably another 40 in the queue and an equal amount sitting behind them that we're working with. So we're seeing, the proverbial hockey stick in terms of interest and demand. Companies are doing pilot projects, they're moving to larger scale projects. And as I mentioned earlier, that sort of trust well certification is a big ESG move opportunity for them to be able to kind of get an understanding of how well their house is in order.
Okay. So there's a follow-up question regarding acceptability of the certification. So that gets into really two things, right? We're talking about the regulator and the future regulator being SEC and what its impact is going to be on the industry. And then we're talking about the BlackRocks and others of the world as they think about this sort of rating. So talk to me a little bit about where the state of art is, or the acceptability on the TrustWell certification, or on other competitor platforms.
Yeah, no, this is a great question and one we get often. I'll come at it in a number of different ways because I think there is a lot here. No one came down from above and sort of gave us the authority to be a certification program, just like nobody did that for LEED, right? And so what happens is markets evolve, the need is there, and people step into it. Obviously, things like the Energy Star program that EPA has is a little bit different. The devices, I forget what that, the electronic devices have that certification as well. Have they accepted it per se? No, they haven't accepted it, but they're well aware of the work that we're doing. We're actually doing a couple of things that I think are notable in terms of this question. So we are working with the state of Colorado. They have an alternate method regulatory application where you can apply. It's similar to the EPA's AML process, which is, again, an alternative technology to achieve a regulatory requirement. So we're doing that in Colorado. We put an application in to basically allow continuous monitoring to suffice for regular LDAR inspection. And in which case you would do, you would send LDAR out by exception rather than by rule, on a quarterly basis. Obviously, this technology is there all the time. So we're working through that process, and Region 8 EPA are working very closely with the state of Colorado in that process. So I think in terms of endorsement or understanding of what's happening, I think that's a real positive for us in the process that we're undertaking.
So it's basically what we're talking about here as industry evolution and adopting standards that have the potential of being adopted or being viewed as the good housekeeping seal of approval in the arc of history that moves more and more toward transparency. Right?
Yes.
Am I
Yes, indeed.
describing that correctly, Brian?
Yes, indeed. Yeah.
Okay.
And I think, the other thing I'll say, it goes without saying, I guess, but markets are clearly, leaning in on certification without a doubt. I mean, that we'll have 10,000 wells certified by year end, that these other players are coming into the market as well, I think bodes well for certification programs writ large.
Now,
I hope I've answered that question. I think I have, but again, you would replace a quarterly, a semi-annually, or an annual leak detection and repair inspection program with continuous monitoring. And where you have events, significant events, you would send out your optical gas imaging camera teams to perform inspections.
Okay. So now let's talk about our marginal well operators, our family-owned businesses that they've accessed private capital, they've known their bankers for years, or they're operating within their own cash flow. How critical is this going to be for them? And how will technology drive down costs so that there is applicability for the smaller producer, the marginal well operator, et cetera?
Yeah.
So,
yeah, so I think a couple ways to address this, Brooke. Certainly there are other technologies. I mentioned one. There's another company out there called LongPath. And I mentioned Baker Hughes and their Avitas product. Some of those technologies are a little more cost effective, but again, it depends on what you're trying to solve for. Are you just monitoring, or are you actually trying to get into responsibly sourced gas markets? And therein lies the question: what technology, what's the fidelity of the data that it can demonstrate for a buyer, right? To be comfortable with that. So that's the balance there. And certainly for smaller operators, costs are obviously a bigger consideration. For those, single well pad locations, obviously you're not going to want to apply, $1,000 a month kind of cost to something like that, unless you can find a way to get into a gas market that's paying a premium. One of the things that we have heard from those, intimately involved in the gas trading world is that they envision a future where certified gas almost becomes the benchmark, and that potentially that non-certified gas could sell at a discount. And we've seen that in other markets, right? Fuels, things of that nature. So again, we're listening, we're in touch with some of these folks in the market, but they sort of think 3 to 5 years out, you'll begin to see this more becoming the standard.
Okay. All right. So again, part of our effort is to demonstrate for our members where the puck may be heading. And I would encourage all of our members, whether they're small, medium, or large, or whether they are in the upstream or the midstream or the downstream side of the sector, to be thinking about all of these questions and how the relevancy of the topic is for your particular business. Brian, is there anything that you want to express in closing as we transition here?
Yeah, I'll just, I would say, getting back to the question around EPA and all of that, we have heard of operators, particularly in the state of Colorado, who have said to themselves, I'd like to actually include as part of my application for a permit that I'm doing that I've certified my operations and that I'm continuously monitoring those locations, as a way to demonstrate to the state regulator that I've got very solid operations, and notionally that would give them, they think would give them some sort of consideration in that process. Additionally, we've been contacted by some folks at the federal level who are sort of trying to wrestle with how to deal with this dynamic where we have no permitting, no leasing going on federal lands, as a way to sort of potentially kind of adjust the standards on federal lands to require some sort of either certification or something like that, as a way, again, to break that log jam. Because left alone, I don't think a solution is in the offing here in the near term. So just wanted to sort of offer that as a little more evidence to how markets are really beginning to pay more and more attention to this, and people are adopting it as part of their strategy to deal with regulatory, permitting, and other considerations.
Got it. Brian, one final question here before we transition out. The question is $1,000 a month a good ballpark estimate for a certified monitored site? Recognize.
So for a multi-pad location, it's somewhere, if we're going to deploy 3 units on a location, it's about $1,900 a month is what it would come out to.
Okay.
And so, if you're dealing the Marcellus, the Haynesville, these costs on a volume basis tend to be less than a penny an M, and sometimes even quite a bit lower. So, some large Haynesville or Marcellus wells, low methane operations, we can get it down to less than a half a penny. But obviously, every consideration is different. I don't want to quote. And then, more liquids rich basins, obviously, take into consideration, a higher cost there. But we're working in the Marcellus, the Utica, currently in the Haynesville, talking to some folks about Scoop Stack. We're in the Eagleford, the Permian, the DJ Basin, and up in Wyoming in Green River Basin, Powder River, and Pinedale Anticline, all that. And we've got sort of molecules moving all across the country that are certified. And we see the market sort of evolving. So, that's about it, Brooke. I don't think we've missed anything that we wanted to convey here, and thank you for the opportunity. If there are any additional questions, I'm happy to answer them here, or address them here, or if folks want to reach out again, by all means, feel free to do so.
We'll be happy to make a connection on that. Brian, thank you very much for joining us today. I want to remind all of our viewers that registration is open for our August 5th through 7th annual meeting at the Four Seasons Resort and Club Dallas. That is our largest event of the year. It's an annual meeting. It's a great opportunity for us to come back together, folks, and to really talk about where we are in this phase of the cycle. I want to point out that July 12th is our inaugural Firecracker Golf Tournament at Twin Hills. The Stack Summer Classic. If you are doing business in the Anadarko Basin, around Kingfisher County, etc., you will want this opportunity to meet constituents, landowners, farmers, parents of the kids who are raising livestock, showing them, getting involved in STEM, etc. This is a great opportunity to make those connections, as well as with local public officials. And then let's see, please be certain to check out our events calendar online, or check out, I believe, our Tuesday emails that go out to talk about what events we have stacked up. And coming up, we will have another Morning Fuel with economist Dr. Russell Evans from OCU on July 14th. We're going to talk about an exciting new partner program we have there that will provide some value for our members. Brian, thank you very much for joining us today. Please go to thepetroleumalliance.com or look at our events emails for additional information. Thank you so much, guys, for participating.